Yeah, so this email came out from the DOGE, obviously from the Office of Personnel and Management. This email went to all the federal workers, essentially said, reply back in 5 bullets. Tell us what you did last week. But then Elon Musk went on X later and said, look, failure to reply to this means that you're just going to resign or would be taken as an act of resignation. Now, President Trump walked that back just a little bit in his remarks just about an hour ago with President Macron in the Oval Office. But he said it was still a good idea to send this email out because they wanted to know who was working and who was not. But the pushback came from several of the agencies like the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, where they said either wait for further guidance or in the Department of Homeland Security's case, we're going to hand that email on your behalf. So I don't think this means that, DOGE is going to be going one by one, meaning we're going to fire people later this week, but rather it was an exercise, I think, to get the federal workforce's attention and certainly put them on guard that, the DOGE office or committee or whatever you discuss it as, is going to be going through with a fine-tooth comb and trying to find more areas to cut. So this story is certainly going to continue to develop over the next few weeks.
Do we see the agencies, the departments that have pushed back and said, wait a second, take a step back, don't worry about doing this right now? Is that for potential national security reasons, or can it be construed as something else?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, certainly national security reasons are important. There was the email said, don't reply with classified or confidential information, and President Trump alluded to that in his Oval Office remarks. But also, I would just say that, there's a lot of unintended consequences that comes with this, mass firing, if you will, of the federal government workforce. We saw this happen with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Russ Vought, the director of the OMB, went in, announced that 95% of the CFPB employees would be leaving, and accidentally, or, as a byproduct of this, let go a couple of employees that are very, very important to the mortgage market, and subsequently had to go back and rehire those employees, get them back to do something what's called the APOR. It's very important to the mortgage rates. So as we move forward, we're going to still continue to see this play out. The challenge for those of us in the markets are going to be is how to try and predict those unintended consequences and see if we can figure out a way to actually minimize the impact to companies and sectors in the investment portfolios we cover.
All right, but I talked about pushback in the introduction, and this has to do with some of the heads of some of the various administrations. Kash Patel, first day in office, right? So what might have been interim or, substitute leaders of groups while people were being confirmed, well, now those people have been confirmed and they're taking over. So there is some pushback about, hey, whoa, let's slow this down a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, these cabinet officials and these agency heads certainly do not want Elon Musk going in there and playing with their own personnel and their own strategy. I mean, most of these individuals, when they took to these positions, they took them under the idea that they were going to be the one leading this. So I certainly think there's going to be friction there. And this is what we coined the soap opera portion of the Trump presidency because, President Trump isn't somebody who brings in a cabinet full of people that are going to agree. He brings in people that will eventually disagree, and these disagreements will take place. But ultimately, it's President Trump that's going to make the end game discussion here. The other thing, pushback we're starting to see is a little bit from the Republican side in Capitol Hill. There's been some town halls recently. One happened down in Georgia, for example, where constituents were beginning to say, we're not comfortable with the DOGE operating apparatus here because 80% of the federal workforce is outside of the district area. And so when you start to see cuts happening in Philadelphia or in Atlanta, there's a lot of local politicians that are going to start getting dragged into the fold here. Not at the point where I think it's going to change any way of congressional outlook in terms of reconciliation, but with midterm elections starting to loom, only 18 months from now, you're certainly going to see a lot more pressure on the Republican Party for these cuts.